Can you believe this position is a draw? White has two connected passed pawns, and black has a rook. And most people would panic and play rook g7 check, and this is winning for white as they can move out the way and queen, and black will lose. So instead of playing rook g7 check, you play king d4, and what this does is, it attacks the pawn that is undefended, forcing the king to defend and free his most developed pawn. Then you play rook g5, ignoring the pawn that can go to d7, because you play rook takes c5 check, removing one of the pawns. No matter what white does, you attack the last pawn, and the next move, you take the pawn and draw the game. Use this chess tactic to obliterate your opponent. Both sides have castled and their pieces developed, and the h7 pawn is only protected by its king. White can play the amazing move bishop takes h7, sacrificing itself. Black is confused, and takes the bishop, wondering if you are out of your mind. Then you play the follow-up, knight g5, checking the king. Black doesn't want his king open in the middle of the battlefield and goes back to seek shelter. Little does black know, you have mate in 3. Queen h5, eyeing the h7 square for checkmate. Black now sees this threat and plays rook fe8, giving breathing space for the king, but it doesn't matter, you take the f7 pawn with your queen. Black goes to h8, only move. And you checkmate by taking g7 with your queen and win. Stuck on what to do in the middle game? All you have to do is look for strengths and weaknesses. White just played e4, which attacks the d5 pawn, and black made a bad move by not dealing with the threat and played bishop d6. So, taking the pawn on d5 isn't good, as black will take with the knight and your bishop on h4 is nothing. So instead, get rid of the defender by playing the strong move bishop takes f6. When black recaptures, you can take the pawn on d5 with the knight, and you are up a pawn, and you have a nasty fork on f7 waiting to happen, and you have a winning position. Keep looking for simple tactics like these and you'll win. An insane smothered mate. In 2004 German championship between Klaus Bischoff as white and Carsten Müller as black had them in f7 check, king g8 only move, knight h6 discovered check, king h8, queen g8 check. Sacrificing the queen. What a beautiful move. No matter how black takes your queen, you will end the game gracefully with the subtle knight f7 checkmate. A cruel checkmate. This is a game I played with the black pieces. Both sides have castled and pieces are developed, and white just played knight d2, an excellent move, but I had my own plans as I gained more space by pushing my pawn to e5, defended by the bishop, and if white takes I will recapture, and my bishop is more active and it threatens the rook on a1. Which is what exactly happened. White moved his rook to b1 to avoid the threat, and I played queen c6, which was the only bad move I played in the match. It was an inaccuracy, but what was going through my head was I had a battery pointing towards the g2 square, and I was going to move the d5 pawn to reveal the threat on g2 and try and checkmate white. White played knight f3 threatening my bishop, but I ignored it and carried on with my plan, and white couldn't resist the free bishop, but it was a trap, and now queen g2 checkmate. A deadly opening trap for black. We play e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6 and bishop c4. Now we play knight d4, giving up the pawn on e5. White takes, wondering why you gave up a pawn, but it's part of our plan. Now we play queen g5, giving up another pawn on f7. White takes again, as he will be 2 pawns up and the rook is smothered and will inevitably be taken. Now we play queen takes g2, and white plays the only move to save his rook, which is rook f1, and now we play queen takes e for check. Black has 2 choices to block with the queen or the bishop. White doesn't want to lose their queen, so they block with the bishop, but I tricked you, because we have knight f3 smothered checkmate. So white has to sacrifice their queen in order to survive, and I'm sure you can win with a queen up. This is the Blackburn Shilling Gambit. And 100 accuracy opening trap for white. We play e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6 and bishop b5, and black plays knight f6 attacking the east for square, but we ignore it and castle. Black wonders why you gave up your pawn and takes it, but it's part of our plan, as we now play rook e1, threatening the knight, and black moves the knight to d6, threatening the bishop. And we play the bold move, knight takes e5, sacrificing the bishop. Black takes the hanging bishop, thinking you suck at chess, but now the great move, knight takes c6 discovered check. Now black loses his queen no matter what move he makes. If black blocks with the bishop, we take the queen with the knight. and if black blocks with the queen, again, we take the queen with the knight, and to follow up, you play queen e2, forking the knight and bishop. This is the Roy Lopez Rio gambit accepted. Keep losing to the fried liver? Here's how to not. The fried liver is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6 and knight g5. White's pieces are pointing to the f7 square and it's a deadly threat, and lots of people ignore the threat and play h6, getting the knight to move back, but the knight does the opposite and attacks f7, defended by the bishop, forking your queen and rook, and white is purely winning. So to stop white in their tracks you play d5 instead of anything else, and white takes the free pawn with their pawn, threatening your knight, but now you play knight a5, threatening the hanging bishop. White moves the bishop to b5 checking you, and now you play c6, you trade pawns, and the bishop goes to d3. You're a pawn down, but you have much more domination than white, and you are more developed. Which is better, bishop or knight? Well, it depends on the situation. In endgames, knights are mostly better, and here's why. Here we have an endgame and white has a knight and black has a bishop. Black has a major disadvantage as his bishop is only locked to one color, whereas white's knight can alternate between colors and navigate effectively and overwhelm black. Now white gets rid of black's pawns and then pushes his own to promotion, and black can't do anything except sacrifice their bishop to stop white from queening. But it doesn't matter because eventually white will methodically cut off black's circulation to his pawn. Then, white will queen and inevitably checkmate black and emerge victorious. Which is better, bishop or knight? In most cases knights are better, especially in closed endgames, but there are special exceptions, like in this endgame. Here we have white with a knight and black with a bishop. Both are even in material, but positionally it's not equal. Here in this situation black is winning, and I will show you. White plays e3 protecting the d4 pawn, and black plays e5 attacking the d4 pawn. White plays king f3 to protect the e3 pawn and get closer to the action, but black shows their winning advantage as they play bishop f5. This traps white's king and black can easily win, so instead of playing king f3, white has to give up their b5 pawn by playing knight c2 so white can free their knight from the corner. Black takes and white's knight reroutes, and white tries to get their knight into play, but it ends in vain as black now has a passed pawn and will win this endgame, and in this endgame bishops are better. A lethal trap for white. This is the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Gambit, also known as the Tennyson Gambit. We play e4 and black plays d5, attacking the pawn, but we ignore black's attack and play knight f3. Black takes the free pawn and that threatens the knight, and we move our knight to g5, and now black protects their hanging pawn by playing knight f6, and we play pawn d3, offering to give another pawn. Black trades, and we take back with our bishop, and black plays h6 trying to get our knight to move back, but we do the opposite and we play knight takes f7. Black is confused and takes your knight with their king. Now we play bishop g6 check, creating a discovered attack against the queen. Black realizes what jeopardy they are in and realize that they lose their queen. You are up a queen for a knight and a bishop, you can castle. Meanwhile black's king is very exposed and vulnerable to more attacks, and with this trap you can easily win and decimate your opponent. How to destroy black in 8 moves with the Skara Gambit. We play the Queen's Gambit declined, which is d4, d5, c4, and e6. Now we play knight c3 developing our knight, and now black plays c5, the Tarish defense. Now we take their d5 pawn and black responds with taking d4, threatening our knight, but we don't move the knight away but in fact play pawn takes e6, sacrificing the knight. Black is confused and takes the knight, but now we play pawn takes f7 check, and black won't take the pawn with their king as it will leave their queen undefended, so they move their king to e7 thinking they are still winning. But we play the absurd move pawn takes knight and promote to a knight. This checks the king. Black takes the knight with their rook, but then they regret what just happened, because we play bishop g5 check, skewering the king and queen, and black moves their king to e8 knowing that they have lost their queen, and now we play queen takes d8 check and you crush your opponent. Evaluating middle game positions. Sometimes we get stuck in middle game positions and we don't know what to do, and we want to fluster our opponent and try and get a winning advantage. This was a game I played with black, and both sides have castled and their pieces developed. We want to look at what weaknesses there are in the position, so I just played bishop a5, as white just threatened my bishop with a3. Now white plays h3, which creates a weakness as the pawn used to be on h2, and they defended the g3 square, and now there is no defender there and we can infiltrate. So I played knight e4, attempting to fork the rook and queen and infiltrate. White played knight e5, ignoring my fork. They were probably wanting to take my bishop and damage my pawn structure, or hope for me to trade and open the f-file for their rook. But I played knight g3, forking the rook and queen, and they resigned. You too can use tactics and overrule your opponent. A crushing trap for black. This is the Trampowski classical defense with a deadly twist. White plays d4 and we play knight f6, and white plays bishop g5, the Trampowski attack. Now we play e6, the classical defense, and this opens a site for our bishop, and white plays knight c3, developing their piece, and we play c5, offering a trade of our pawns. White takes the pawn and we take back with our bishop, and now white plays the move knight e4, attacking our bishop and sacrificing their knight. And what they want is for black to take white's knight, and the bishop will take the queen, and if black does that, white thinks that black is losing. And we let this exactly happen. We take white's knight and white takes our queen, but little does white know we have checkmate with bishop takes f2, and you shatter your opponent. The most brutal checkmate. This was the Pizka Christmas tournament in 1928, with Gunnar Gundersen as white and A.H. as black. Now, black just played knight e7, so they can castle next move, and white plays bishop g3 with a devastating plan up their sleeve. Black castles and white now plays the brilliant move, bishop takes h7 check, a Greek gift. Black takes and white plays knight g5 check, black's king goes to g6 and white plays h for protecting the knight. Black blunders the knight by playing knight takes d4, but white ignores the knight and has plans of their own by playing queen g4. Black plays f5 in hopes to kick out the queen, but white plays h5 check and black's king goes to h6. White plays knight takes e6 discovered check, and black plays g5 blocking the check, and white plays the killer move pawn takes g6 en passant checkmate. A destructive trap for white. We play e4, e5, knight f3 and d6, the Philidor's defense, and now we play bishop c4, developing the bishop with the aggressive stance pointing to the f7 square, and black plays h6, trying to stop white from playing knight g5 with a double attack on f7 with the knight and the bishop. Now we play knight c3, developing our piece and conquering the d5 square, and black plays the mistake, bishop g4, and it's bad because we play the brilliant move knight takes e5, sacrificing the knight and the queen, and most beginners will take the queen as they think you suck at chess, but little do they know what's coming at them as we play bishop takes f7 check, defended by the knight. Black plays king e7, only move, and we play knight d5 checkmate, and you obliterate your opponent. But if we go back to where we sacrificed the knight, and black takes the knight, we take the bishop with the queen, and as a result of that, you are a pawn up, you can castle and black can't. How to punish the wayward queen attack with 100% accuracy. We play e4, e5 and white plays queen h5, posing a threat to the f7 square. So, what we should play is knight c6 defending the e5 pawn, white plays bishop c4, going for checkmate on the next move, but now we play g6 and white can't take our e5 pawn as it is defended by the knight. White plays queen to f3 still trying to go for the checkmate, but we play knight f6 blocking the queen's site. White plays g4 trying to move your knight so that they can checkmate you, but we play knight d for threatening the queen, and a fork on the next move. White plays queen d3 stopping both of those threats, and now we play d5, blocking the bishop's site to the f7 square. White takes, and now we play knight takes g4, and white tries to boot out our knight, but now you have a brutal mate in 4, queen h4, king d1, knight f2, king e1, knight takes d3 double check, king f1, and we play queen f2 checkmate. e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d4 and knight takes back, knight c6, knight c3, queen c7 bishop e3, a6, queen f3 knight e5, queen g3 and h5, the last book move. Now, only 8 moves into the game, things get very interesting. Stockfish played h4, stopping the h5 pawn from advancing to h4 whilst threatening the queen, but it is seen as a missed opportunity to punish Leela. Instead of h4, white should have played knight f5, sacrificing the knight. No human would ever play this absurd move, but engine chess is a different league, and I'll explain why. When black takes the knight with the pawn used to defend the d5 square, but after taking the knight it no longer does that, and white can infiltrate by playing knight d5, attacking the queen. Leela moves their queen to b8, playing defensive, while Stockfish gives the blows. Stockfish plays bishop b6, putting pressure right around the queen and trying to asphyxiate Leela's queen. Black plays h4, trying to get the queen to move away from putting pressure on their knight on e5. Stockfish played queen to c3, and in fact this move is the best move. This move puts more pressure on the c7 square, trying to hem in Leela's queen. Black responds with knight to c6, blocking the queen's side to the c7 square. Surprisingly, aside from all of this havoc, Stockfish castled, and indeed it is the best move. Leela responded with bishop to d6, defending the c7 square from the massive pressure from white. Stockfish took the hanging pawn, and Leela played the smart move, bishop e5, trying to remove Stockfish's queen from eyeing the c7 square. But Stockfish doesn't move their queen away, but white pins the bishop to the king by playing rook e1. Black played knight g e7, blocking the pin from the rook, so now black can move their bishop without being under check. Now white's queen can be taken if they don't do anything about it, but Stockfish deals with this problem so brutally because Stockfish plays the brilliant move, rook takes e5, sacrificing the rook. Now Leela has two ways to take white's rook, with the knight or with the queen. If Leela takes the rook with the knight, it is a blunder, because the knight used to be on c6, stopping white's queen from eyeing the c7 square. Now the knight has moved, Stockfish wreaks havoc and obliterates Leela. Stockfish starts by playing bishop to c7, attacking both Leela's queen and knight. If black moves their queen out of the bishop's attack, it is practically game over for black. White takes the hanging knight with their queen, and with an unforgiving attack on black's king. Leela plays queen c5, desperately getting their queen back into action, but it's too late as white has already won. Stockfish plays f7, and Leela can't take because Stockfish plays knight takes f6 check, with a discovered attack on the queen, and it's mate in 11, and engines can easily follow through in these positions. So instead of taking the f7 pawn, Leela castles, hoping for safety, but regardless, white takes black's hanging knight with check, and another discovered attack happens on the hanging queen, and as a result of that, black has to take the knight for its queen, and the game is lost for black. So going back a few moves, attack, so the best move to play is d6, giving up the queen, and black recaptures, and they trade knights. Stockfish plays f4, getting the knight to move out of the way so the queen can take g7. Stockfish is completely winning with 3 points up on material, and 5.8 points up on the evaluation bar. I told you we were going in depth. Also remember that these are variations I am showing you. These variations are the thought process behind the engine's moves in the whole game I am showing you in this video. So going back a few moves, we now know that taking the rook with the knight is a blunder, but instead, taking the rook with the queen is the best move. White takes the queen, and Leela recaptures with the knight. But now white forks the rook and king, Leela moves their king and white regains the rook back, and Leela evens the material by taking the hanging pawn on f5 with their knight on e7. But white is 1.1 up on the evaluation bar. So going all the way back to the beginning, this is why Stockfish should have sacrificed their knight. I told you that these engines are on another league than humans. So, back to the real game after Stockfish played h4 and Leela played b5, controlling the a and c4 squares, and also giving room for the bishop on c8 to develop. Stockfish castles queenside, and black plays d6, an inaccuracy because the best move was b4, getting the knight to move from its post as it controlled the b and d5 squares, and getting it to move to a4. After d6, Stockfish played a3 and Leela responded with knight to f6. Now, Stockfish played bishop g5, threatening the knight, and the idea is when the knight is taken, it damages black's pawn structure and black's kingside is exposed. But black plays the move rook b8, developing the rook and defending the pawn on b5. But Stockfish starts the attack and plays f4, now both Leela's knights are getting attacked and the position starts to get tricky. Leela moves their e-knight to g4, it's bad because the knight doesn't really accomplish anything, instead moving the knight back to d7 was better, with potential to reroute to c5 and put a lot more useful pressure on white. Stockfish gives another blow and pushes their e-pawn, attacking the knight even further. Leela gives a counterattack by threatening the knight on c3. They both trade pawns twice, but the rook recapturing the b4 pawn is a mistake. The best move is, if the bishop on f8 takes, developing the bishop, and allowing black to castle to safety, so rook takes b4 is a mistake. Now at this very moment the game-changing moment happens. The most extraordinary chess is played with such brutality beyond belief. In this position, Stockfish played knight d to b5, a stunning sacrifice. The knight can be taken two ways, and there are so many variations in this position, and I will go through them all so you don't have to. If Leela takes the knight with the pawn, which is the best move, white plays the killer move, pawn takes f6, sacrificing their queen. Leela takes the queen and Stockfish takes the g7 pawn, forking the rook and bishop and threatening promotion. Now you can't take the pawn with the bishop, because Stockfish would finish Leela with rook d8 checkmate. So, Leela saw that white's bishop on g5 is a major problem, threatening checkmate constantly, and now Leela knows why Stockfish sacrificed their queen. Leela has to remove the bishop from the game, or else it's fatal for black. Now, you would think that moving the queen to c7, defending the d8 square from checkmate is a good idea, but Stockfish would take the rook on h8 with the pawn and promote to a queen. Now Stockfish is completely winning in position and material. The queen and knight sacrifice gave Leela so much to handle that material wasn't even the question. Now we know that Leela can't save her queen and has to give it up by playing queen f4 or queen to e3, but it has the same desired effect, forcing Stockfish to take the queen, and white was being checked as well. Leela takes the dangerous pawn on g7 and Stockfish plays bishop to b5 check, and taking the bishop with the rook is the best move, because if Leela doesn't and moves their king to any legal square, which is f8 or e7, then Stockfish plays the great move bishop d6 check, forking the king and the rook, and black loses the rook on the spot. So taking the knight with the rook is the best move, because the rook was going to be lost anyway, and the rook might as well take a knight down with them. So, going all the way back to the knight sacrifice, we will now look at why the rook can't take, as the knight would take back, and when Leela recaptures the knight the same brutal moves happen as Stockfish sacrifices their queen yet again, and we follow the same procedure. When Leela takes the queen, Stockfish takes the pawn on b5 with check, and the only move for Leela is to block the check with the bishop. Stockfish takes the bishop with their bishop, and Leela's only move is king to d8. Now Stockfish plays the brutal move pawn takes g7 discovered check from the bishop, forcing a promotion to a queen for white, and Stockfish absolutely dominates the position and can easily win. So, going all the way back to the knight sacrifice, we know that this move is so brutal. Back to the real game, where Leela ignored the knight sacrifice and took the pawn on e5, but Stockfish played knight to c7 check. Leela moves their king to e7. And now again you are about to witness another crushing move as Stockfish plays the killer move knight 7 to d5, another brilliant move. Now, Leela can take two ways. Taking with the queen is obviously bad, because you lose the queen on the spot to knight takes d5 check. So the best way to take the knight is with the pawn. Stockfish takes back with the knight, checking the king, and Leela moves their king to e6, getting rid of the pin of the knight from their king. But Stockfish plays knight f for check, a great move, and you'll see why. Black's king goes back to e7, and white pins the queen to the king by playing rook e1. Black places their rook between the rook and the queen by moving it to e4, and Stockfish plays bishop to d3, putting pressure on the rook. Leela moves their rook to e3, getting out of the danger, but Stockfish plays the beautiful move, knight to g6 check, with a discovered attack on the queen. The queens are traded, but white is winning as they play knight to f7 check, forking the king and the rook. White wins the rook, and Leela plays knight to f2, now trying to give the shots. Stockfish moves their h-rook to f1, and black trades their knight on f2 for the bishop on d3. Now Leela plays bishop to b4, threatening the rook. White moves their rook to e2, and black plays bishop g4, playing aggressive and threatening the rook on e2 once again. Stockfish plays rook c2, getting out of danger while checking the king. Stockfish then takes Leela's knight on f6 for their bishop, and white plays knight to g6, getting their knight back into the game. Leela takes the hanging pawn on d3, and Stockfish plays knight to f4, threatening the rook. Leela moves their rook to d6 and Stockfish plays another brilliant move, knight takes h5, winning a pawn. Leela takes the knight with their bishop and Stockfish plays rook f5 check, forking the king and bishop and will win back the 3-point minor piece. Leela moves their king to a4 and Stockfish takes the hanging bishop. Now Leela moves their king to b3, looking for some checkmate ideas by hopefully getting their rook on the first rank, but Stockfish intercepts by playing rook f3 check, getting the king to move away to a4. Now Stockfish takes the hanging pawn on f6 and black moves their king to b3, back for some checkmate ideas. Stockfish crushes Leela's idea again by forcing the king to move away yet again by playing rook f3 check, and the king goes back to a4 and Stockfish moves their king to b1. Leela plays a5 trying to gang up on the somewhat lonely king, and Stockfish plays king a2, creating a defense so black can't infiltrate and threatens checkmate on the next move with rook a3. Leela plays bishop d2, freeing the b4 square for the king. Stockfish plays rook a3 check and Leela is forced to play king to b4, and Stockfish takes the hanging pawn with their h-rook on a5. Leela plays king c4, revealing an attack on the a5 rook. Stockfish moves their threatened rook to a for checking the king. Leela blocks with the bishop and Stockfish moves their rook to b3, putting immense pressure on Leela's bishop. Now Stockfish trades all of the pieces and the h-pawn can queen safely and win the game. This was an amazing game, and the thought process behind all of these engines is spectacular. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Also, the game's PGN is in the description if you want to look at the game yourself. Chesscadia out. Alexander played e4 and Louis played c5, the Sicilian defense, which is the most common response to e4. Alexander plays knight f3, which controls the e5 square and also prepares for a d4 push, and the knight will recapture the pawn if black's pawn on c5 takes. Louis plays knight c6, attacking the d4 square further and counters white's control on e5. Alexander plays d4, the common pawn push, and they trade pawns. Now, black plays e5 trying to get rid of white's knight while giving room for black's bishop on f8 to develop. Now they trade knights and white plays bishop c4, developing a minor piece. Now Louis plays knight f6, attacking Alexander's pawn on e4, and in response Alexander plays bishop g5, pinning the attacker, the knight in this case, to the queen, so black can't take the pawn on e4 as it will hang their queen and black will be losing. So, Louis blocks the pin by playing bishop e7, and Alexander defends the vulnerable pawn on e4 by playing queen e2, and black plays d5, attacking both the pawn and the bishop and also having a strong pawn center, thus resulting in black having the slighter edge in this position. Alexander takes Louis' knight on f6 with their bishop, which is an inaccuracy because taking d5 is better because you get material and you have another discovered attack on black's e5 pawn. So back to the inaccuracy, Louis took Alexander's bishop and white retracted their undefended bishop and both sides castle, and black plays a5, threatening to trap white's bishop next move by playing a4. Alexander tries to solve this problem by playing pawn takes d5, but it is bad because it allows black to develop their piece while getting white to retreat as black plays bishop a6, skewering the queen and the rook, so white has to block by playing c4. But black takes the pawn back on d5 while putting more pressure on the sacred pawn that blocks a devastating attack on the queen and the rook. But still, recapturing the pawn is still effective. Alexander plays rook to d1, putting more pressure on the d5 square, and in response, Louis plays d4, and the pawn is now adequately defended. Now Alexander tries to play actively, but it isn't the right option here as her plays c4, trying to make the most of his passed pawn and get it off the starting ranks as soon as possible, but it's not good because knight d2 was the best as it connects both rooks together while developing a minor piece as well. Louis responds with queen b6, developing the queen, and Alexander plays bishop b2 so that the bishop can see more squares. Now black plays bishop b7, connecting the rooks while developing a piece, and at last Alexander plays knight to d2, finally connecting the rooks. Now, Louis plays rook a to e8, supporting their e-pawn and hoping to start an attack by pushing his pawns. Alexander responds with knight to e4, which is an inaccuracy because a3 is better as it controls the b4 square. Now Louis plays bishop to d8, and I can see why he did that. It's because he didn't want to block his rook on e8 from giving a circulation to the pawn on the e-file for potential pushing, but bishop e7 is best. Alexander plays pawn c6, pushing his passed pawn while threatening Louis's queen. Louis moves his queen to c6 and they start shuffling pieces until black starts his attack by playing f5. Alexander checks black, but it isn't going to stop him as he moves his king to h8. White plays bishop a4, skewering the queen and the rook. Why is this move an inaccuracy, you ask? Well, it's because Louis has a devastating plan up his sleeve. Black moves his queen and lets his rook be taken as Louis takes white's knight on e4. White plays c6, pushing that passed pawn like there's no tomorrow, threatening the bishop. But now you are about to witness such savage play, in this position. Louis-Charles de Labourdonnais played pawn takes f3, sacrificing the bishop. And you now ask, why can't white take the bishop on b7 with the pawn that is now so close to promotion? Well, it's because Louis now has mate in 6. Queen e for check, king h1, pawn takes g2 check, king takes, rook f2 check, king g1, rook takes b2 discovered check, king h1, queen e for check, king g1, and finally queen g2 checkmate. All of Alexander's pieces just stood there and watched their king get massacred. So this is why you can't take the bishop on b7, and Louis's thought process behind this move is incredible. So back to the real game where Alexander played rook to c2, stopping black's pawn from taking g2 and exposing the king to danger. And Louis played queen e3, a crushing mistake as not this position is now even as white can block the check with rook and stopping the pawn on f3 from moving further. But Alexander didn't play rook f2, but instead he played the blunder, king h1. Now Louis played bishop c8, stopping white from queening, and Alexander presents a trade with bishop d7. Louis ignored the trade and continues his attack by playing f2. Alexander blocks and Louis keeps pushing his pawns by playing d3, and in response, white plays rook to c3, pinning black pawn to the queen, but it is a mistake because black can buy time by trading the bishops and pushing the pawn, e4. Alexander plays queen to c8, trying to queen, but Louis blocks the queen and the pawn with bishop to d8. White plays queen to c4, completely abandoning their attack as it is useless and the position is now worsened. Louis played queen to e1, doing the same as Alexander. Alexander plays rook to c1, but Louis doesn't care about the queen and plays d2, and in response, Alexander plays queen to c5, threatening checkmate by attacking the rook, but it is simply defended with the subtle rook g8. Alexander plays rook d1, stopping both of the pawns' promotion square, and both pawns are under attack. Louis plays e3, defending both of the pawns. Alexander plays the inaccuracy, queen to c3. And now you are about to witness such crushing play by Louis. In this position, Louis-Charles de Labourdonnais played the brilliant move. Queen takes d1, sacrificing the queen. And now for the magical finish. Rook takes d1 and e2 from Louis, and Alexander resigned on the spot because it is mate in 5 as follows. h4, pawn takes d1, promote to a queen, king h2, f1, promote to another queen, queen d4, bishop c7 check, queen d6, bishop takes d6 check, king h3, and queen h1 checkmate. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, b6, g3, bishop a6 and b3. Now Leela plays d5, controlling the center with two pieces defending it. Stockfish plays bishop g2, fianchettoing the bishop, which eyes the rook on a8 when the pawn and knight are moved. Now Leela plays d takes c for an inaccuracy because Leela gave away their strong pawn center, allowing white to break open the position further. Stockfish plays knight e5, attacking the pawn on c4 whilst having a discovered attack on the a8 rook. Leela plays bishop b for check. It isn't the best move as white can move their king to f1, and it is very safe from attacks at this point in the game. Now here is where things get interesting as black plays bishop d6, attacking the knight and ignoring the hanging rook. So white could take the rook on a8, but it is met with bishop takes e5, and white can't retreat their bishop because black would take d4 with the bishop, and the rook on a1 is trapped, and it is completely losing for white. So going back to bishop takes e5, we now know that white can't save their bishop on a8 as they have to protect the d4 square to stop the rook on a1 from being trapped. So the solution to that is to play e3, and black plays c6, making the bishop inevitably be taken later on. So going back to bishop d6, we now know that white can take the rook on a8 for the cost of a knight and a bishop, so it's not worth it. So instead of letting the knight hang, white can play the brilliant move, knight takes f7, sacrificing the knight. As it was going to be taken anyway, white might as well get some material for it, and after the same sequence of moves the material is evened and the position is fully drawing. But Stockfish didn't go to this line of play, but going back to bishop d6, Stockfish played knight takes c4, evading the threat of the bishop whilst having some control over Leela's position. Now Leela plays the great move, knight to d5, blocking the lingering threat of bishop takes a8, and in response Stockfish plays bishop b2, fianchettoing the other bishop with a side to Leela's king side. Leela plays knight c6, developing a knight, and Stockfish plays h4, playing aggressive and starting a kingside attack even though Stockfish's king is on the same side as the attack, therefore it's a double-edged blade. Now Leela plays f5, stopping any g-pawn advances, so Stockfish's h-pawn will remain unaided by another pawn. Now Stockfish plays knight b to d2, connecting the rook and the queen, and the knight has potential to come to the kingside for attacking later. Leela castles, and Stockfish plays king g1. Leela plays b for attacking the knight, and the threatened knight takes the bishop on d6, and the knight is taken with the pawn. Stockfish plays e4, trying to remove the pawn on f5 from stopping white's g-pawn from aiding the h-pawn on the attack of the kingside. Leela accepts, and the pawns are traded. Leela plays queen to d7, and Stockfish plays knight to g5, taking a stance on the kingside and trying to control Leela. But it can be simply removed by h5, right? Wrong! Because in this position, Stockfish plays brilliant move number 1. Queen g4, sacrificing the knight. If Leela takes the knight, it is a mistake because Stockfish plays the great move, bishop takes d5, and you can't take the bishop because Leela would hang their queen and would be losing completely. So going back to bishop takes d5, we now know that you can't take the bishop. So instead the best move is bishop to c8, and now the threat of taking the bishop on d5 is now re-established, so Stockfish would play bishop g2, and whatever black plays white would play pawn takes g5, with a discovered attack on the exposed kingside with the rook on h1, and it is losing badly for black. So going back to queen g4, we now know that Leela can't take the knight. Instead Leela plays rook to f5, the best move. And now you are about to witness more destructive play by Stockfish. In this position, Stockfish plays brilliant move number 2 with the subtle rook e1, sacrificing the knight again. Now when Leela takes the knight, Stockfish would play the next brilliant move, queen takes f5, sacrificing the queen, brilliant move number 3. When the queen is taken, white would take the hanging knight on d5 with check, and Leela would play king h7. Stockfish plays aggressive and plays bishop e6, attacking the queen, and Leela retreats their queen to c7, the best move, therefore leaving the f5 pawn to be taken with check from the bishop, and black blocks with g6. But the rook on h1 gets activated after pawn takes g5, with a discovered attack on the king with the rook on h1, and the king goes to g7, and white is throwing checks everywhere after d5 discovered attack with the bishop on b2, Leela blocks by playing knight e5. And now you are about to witness more crushing play by Stockfish. In this position, Stockfish plays brilliant move number 4, rook h6, sacrificing the bishop. If black takes, which is the best move, it leads to brilliant move number 5. In this position, Stockfish plays the brilliant move, rook takes d6, sacrificing the rook, and when it is taken, which is the best move, white plays bishop takes e5 check, forking the king and the queen is traded for the bishop, and the position is fully drawing with 3 pawns for white for a bishop. So going all the way back to the subtle rook e1 sacrifice, we now know why Leela can't take the knight. Leela plays knight f6 attacking the queen, and the queen moves away to e2. So why can't black take the knight now? Well, after pawn takes knight, Stockfish plays bishop takes c6, Leela takes back with the queen, and Stockfish plays queen takes e6 check. Black shelters their king on h8 and white plays d5, which attacks the queen, but black takes the pawn with the queen as it is defended by the rook. But now white plays pawn takes g5, discovered check from the rook on h1, and black has only one move to play to barely stay in the game, which is queen takes h1, stopping the h1 rook from cornering the king on h8 further, and it is 6 points up on the evaluation bar for white, and Leela would have lost, and if you thought you could block the check with knight h7. You are wrong, as Stockfish plays brilliant move number 6, bishop takes g7 check, and it is now mate in 11, and black gets slaughtered by white's second queen, herded up into a corner and butchered. So going back to queen e2, we now know why Leela can't take the knight. So going back to the real game, where Leela plays rook e8. Stockfish moves the knight away from the sacrificial position by playing knight e4, but it is an inaccuracy, because knight takes e6 is better. Leela plays knight d5, a great move as it stops d5 with a discovered attack on the king side of black and opens up the f-file for the rooks, which are now more maneuverable. Stockfish plays bishop h3, threatening the rook, and with the now open f-file, Leela retreats their threatened rook to f7. Stockfish plays bishop to g for re-establishing the threat of a discovered attack on the king side when the h-pawn is removed, and Leela plays rook f to e7, planning on playing e5 to meet the threat of d5 when the knight moves, so Leela is consolidating their position. Stockfish plays rook h2, defending the f2 pawn, which is susceptible to attacks via the open f-file. Leela plays queen to d8, going back to its home square, disestablishing the threat of when the e6 pawn moves to mute the bishop, who doesn't hang their queen. Stockfish plays f3, and Leela plays knight to b8. Now Stockfish plays queen to c2, controlling the c-file and having another discovered diagonal near the king side once the knight on g5 moves. Leela plays bishop to c8, defending the pawn on e6, and when the pawn moves there is a discovered attack on the bishop on g4. But now you are about to witness more devastating play by Stockfish. In this position, Stockfish plays brilliant move number 7, knight g5, sacrificing the knight again. So what happens if black takes this time? Well, white would take g5 and black would play rook f7, the best move. Stockfish plays g6 and Leela gives away their rook, but why? Well, if we go back to g6 and black retreats their rook to b8. And now you are about to witness more killer play by Stockfish. In this position, Stockfish plays brilliant move number 8, rook h8 check, sacrificing the rook. Leela is forced to take and Stockfish plays queen h2, a great move, forcing Leela to give up their queen, otherwise it is mate in 3 with queen h7 check, queen h8 check, and queen takes g7 checkmate. So going back to pawn takes g5, we now know that you can't retreat the rook, so what about blocking the pawn from advancing further with g6? Well, white plays queen takes g6 check, then repositions their queen. Then an attack on the king side, then the queen side, then the king side, then the brilliant move number 9, queen side attack, rook takes c8 check, then the king side. And now Leela is forced to take the bishop in exchange for her queen, as all other moves are worse, and Stockfish is 10 points up on the evaluation bar and is completely winning. So going back to knight g5, we now know the sheer superiority of Stockfish sacrifices. So back to the real game, where Leela played knight to f6, a great move as it protects the h6 square from any infiltration and adds a layer of protection to the bishop's diagonal on the king side on b2, but Stockfish doesn't care about boundaries, and in this position, Stockfish plays brilliant move number 10, bishop h5, sacrificing the knight and the bishop at the same time. So if Leela takes the knight, it is a mistake, because when the pawn is recaptured, black's rook is threatened by the bishop on h5, so black moves it to f8, but the knight hangs, and white plays bishop g6, trying to asphyxiate Leela's king, and it is lost for black. So going back to the bishop and knight sacrifice, we now know that Leela can't take the knight. But what about the bishop? Well, it's mate in 2 after queen h7 check and queen h8 checkmate. The thought process behind these engines is spectacular, and their level is unfathomable to humans currently. So going back to the bishop and knight sacrifice, we now know why Leela can't take the bishop or the knight. So back to the real game, where Leela played rook f8, moving their threatened rook out of the way from the bishop's sight, and now you are about to witness more slaughterous play by Stockfish. In this position, Stockfish played brilliant move number 11, bishop g6, sacrificing the knight again while also having the bishop remove all of the breathing space for Leela's king. Now if Leela takes the knight, Stockfish takes back with the pawn and Leela plays rook c7, attacking the queen. The queen would simply move out the way and Leela plays rook f to f7, giving the king a way to escape after rook h8 and the knight blocks. Stockfish plays bishop h7, putting immense pressure on the knight, and everything is traded, and white is 6.1 up on the evaluation bar and 3 points up in material. So going back to bishop g6, we now know that Leela can't take the knight, so instead black plays knight to a6. And the brilliancy doesn't end after Stockfish plays brilliant move number 12, 13, 14 and 15. The knight is untouchable. Now after bishop a6 by Leela, Stockfish finally moves the sacrificial knight to h7, blockading the king in and threatening the rook on f8. Leela moves the rook and Stockfish keeps the fire brewing with g5, knocking on the doors of Leela's fort, but Leela doesn't answer the knock and plays knight to h5, stopping the h for pawn from advancing any further into Leela's territory. Stockfish uses a battering ram and starts open fire on Leela's fortress, and fighting fire with fire isn't the best option here as Leela plays g takes h6, opening the diagonal on the king with the bishop on b2. Stockfish takes advantage of Leela's mistake and plays d5, discovered check, and Leela blocks with e5, and Stockfish takes the hanging pawn on h6. Now Leela plays rook takes h7, attacking the queen. Now you would think taking the rook on h7 with the bishop is a good move, but it isn't, as it loses white's winning advantage. So in this position Stockfish plays brilliant move number 17, rook takes e5, sacrificing the rook and the queen. If black takes the rook, it is a blunder because it is mate in 1 with queen takes h7 checkmate. So what about taking the queen? Well, that is in fact the best move, and Leela did play that after checking the king with rook g7 check, blocking the diagonal from the bishop when the rook on e5 is moved. Stockfish blocks the check with rook g2, and Leela takes the hanging queen, and now you are about to witness more killer play by Stockfish. In this position, Stockfish played brilliant move number 18, rook takes h5, sacrificing the rook again. If Leela takes the rook, it is a blunder because the rook is regained after bishop g7 check, which is defended by the rook on g2, and black's king is forced to g8, where it is put under fire with bishop f6, discovered check, which threatens the queen, and the queen's is lost for black, and white is 3 pawns up and completely winning. So going back to the real game, where at the rook sacrifice, Leela played knight e8, defending the sacred rook that blocks the check from the bishop on b2, which hasn't moved in 33 moves, but still is a major factor in this game. Nonetheless, Stockfish takes the rook on g7, which is swiftly recaptured by the knight, and the hanging rook is taken by white, and the material is 3 pawns for a knight and 2 rooks for a queen, and it is in Stockfish's favor. Now Leela moves out of the check with king to g8 only move, but the attack isn't over yet as Stockfish plays rook h7, attacking the knight. Leela knows the knight is lost and throws in a check with queen b6, but it is simply brushed away and Leela's king moves away and the knight is taken. Leela plays queen e3, attacking the hanging pawn on f3, and Stockfish solves this by playing bishop e4, defending the pawn. Leela throws in another check with queen e1, but it is blocked easily with rook g1. Leela's queen goes back to e3, and Stockfish's rook goes to h5. Leela moves their king to e7, and Stockfish replies with a flurry of checks: rook g7 check, rook g6 check, rook h7 check, rook f6 check, and now you are about to witness Stockfish make a mockery of Leela. In this position, Stockfish plays brilliant move 19, rook e5. But hold on. Where's the sacrifice? Well, after Leela forces white's king to h3 after queen e1 check and queen f2 check, Leela pins the rook to the king, and Stockfish placed the rook there to be sacrificed, and that's why it's brilliant.